Okay, perfect. So right now we just covered characteristics, and then we looked at the definition types, and we also discussed the once we discussed the symptoms, we also discussed the different types. So now we're just going to look at the case study. This case study by for this male aged 23 was Conrad. So basically, they're going to be talking about how Conrad was basically having psychotic episodes and how his treatment procedure. Okay, so Conrad had his first psychotic episode whilst on holiday when he was 22 and was later diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. So now they're explaining the third type over here. So first they've explained um, over here schizotypal, right? And then they explain the substance or medical induced. Now they're basically then they obviously talked about schizophrenia, the one we are going to be studying, and then they're just explaining through the study of Conrad. Now this is something that you can be tested on. Okay, so through the study of Conrad, they're looking at schizoaffective disorder. So at first he was reluctant to seek treatment, but he was unsure that he would recover, and subsequently spent the 8 months following his diagnosis in a psychiatric hospital. Through trial and error, Conrad has found the right drug treatment through maintaining a healthy weight. Maintaining a healthy weight remains a challenge. So now, when you're going to be looking at the treatments, this is something we already discussed in bipolar. That there's the side effect that you start gaining weight. That's the side effect of having atypical psychotics, antipsychotics. So again, over here as well, he did find the right drug treatment, but again, the side effect was that he could not maintain his, like he couldn't maintain a healthy weight. So he was basically, they're just saying that when he was 22, that's when he actually had his first episode. That is basically when he discovered his first symptom and realized that, okay, I might have schizophrenia. So that symptom must have been prolonged based on the conditions that we just looked at, right? And once that was done, he basically they're talking about how he was reluctant to seek treatment, but then he did, and that actually did not just happen in a day or a week. That happened, it was prolonged for how many months? 8 months. Okay, so 8 months, he after his diagnosis, he still had 8 months where different treatments were used on him, and then finally he found that. So that's why they say over here trial and error, right? So different treatments were used on him, and then he found the one treatment that actually helped him with his symptoms. So this is just a referencing study. It's like a short reference that you can use, that okay, this was when you're talking about types, you can say that there was also schizoaffective, and Conrad was the study in reference to that. Um, Schizophrenia and delusional disorder. Just give me a second, because I think I've got more referencing. Just checking that. So, just a second. I was just checking my drive. It must have something on referencing. Okay, no, we've got Conrad only. Okay, that's fine. Okay, sure. Get continuing from here. So schizophrenia and delusional disorder. Delusional disorder is another type that's been given over here. Second number two over here. Delusional disorder is a disorder characterized by persistent delusions, but people suffering from it otherwise have quiet, normal behavior, unlike those with classic schizophrenia. So what's the difference between delusional and classic schizophrenia? Schizophrenia can have any of those four positive symptoms and any of those negative symptoms. But when we talk about delusional disorder, this is more revolving around delusions. That's number one. Okay. And then the second thing is that it is relatively lesser suffering than schizophrenia, so it's relatively less extreme than schizophrenia. So but at the same time, it lies within the same category, that you have a lot of delusions, you have continuous delusions. So there's like no stopping of delusions, you're constantly having these false beliefs. Okay, there are many reasons for that. Most of it is like because of trauma. Again, we're going to be looking at the explanation, so that's going to explain better. But that's the one thing. And the second thing is that they are generally less extreme than schizophrenia. Do you understand the difference between delusional and schizophrenia?
Yeah.
Okay. So it also excludes those suffering from Other psychotic symptoms: hallucination, disorganized speech, catatonia, or negative symptoms. So this is not a part of delusions. This is basically a part of schizophrenia only. Just a sec, yeah. And okay, we've got types over here. We've got types of delusional disorders. Okay, so we have erotomanic, which is basically, because delusions are basically false beliefs. So you're believing something that does not exist, that is not true. So the first over here they've given is that, you believe that the other person is in love with you. So just, like, they're not, but at the same time you have this perception that, okay, this person loves me. Maybe they're just being like nice to you. Okay, so you presume, it's like very presumptuous on the basis of somebody's words or actions, and you just lead into believing that. Then we have grandiose, okay, and that's convinced that they have a great unrecognized skill or status. Okay, so basically it's like you still think that, there's this undiscovered um uh, talent that you might have. They have this thing where they're, always just thinking that, with there's, we have not been discovered proper, like until, and there's just, some sort of unrecognized talent and hidden ability inside me. So that's the belief that they have. And we it sounds like very like very irrational right now, but at the same time this is something a lot of people have, like a lot of people, because it's mostly when you fall into a pit of like insecurity, or just not having enough, where it's just like, okay, no, this is not it, this is not it, there's gonna be something. I have an unrecognized status over here, so that sort of a thing. Then we've got jealous, which is again a type of delusional disorder, only when it becomes very extreme that you fall into delusions. How if you're jealous, let's say, even of a normal thing, then if you start presuming on those bases, like let's say if you're jealous that your friend has another close friend, okay, because that's normal. So but then that is okay, that's like a normal emotion. But at the same time, if you start presuming that they might be backbiting about you, or they might be hanging out without you, now all of that thing, that comes under your delusional disorder. So again, believe that the partner is being unfaithful. Then we have persecutory, so that's basically believing that the person is being conspired against or pursued by others who intend to harm them. So basically having the belief that, someone is planning against you. Okay, so conspiring against you, having this whole, like mafia sitting against you, like that sort of a belief, and that they're going to harm you somehow. Okay, so these are all types. These are again very important. Why? Because when you look at these three things: definition, types, examples, and case studies, all of this can be tested in just one question where you have your 10 marker. Then looking at some delusions may also be bizarre. This means that they are clearly impossible or beyond the realm of ordinary occurrence. For example, delusional disorder with bizarre content might involve believing that one's internal organs had been removed and replaced with those of another without leaving any wounds or scars. Non bizarre delusions might include the belief that one's partner is cheating on them, or that their boss wants to fire them. The main difference between is that non bizarre delusions could be true or possible, but unlikely, whereas bizarre delusions may be logically impossible or difficult to understand. So the example that they've given us over here is that delusions, bizarre delusions, they said that, those are the ones that are not possible. So they are just saying that that's like someone took all the organs inside you and you're still alive. That sort of a thing, that sort of a belief, that would fall something that would fall under delusional, because it is not possible. But then when you talk about non-bizarre delusions, they are still delusions because they are unlikely to happen, and you are believing them for no reason whatsoever. There is no evidence regarding them, but you're still believing them. That's why they're delusions. But at the same time, they are non-bizarre because they might happen, they're still possible. Okay, they're not likely, but they are possible. So if push comes to shove, they might happen, that sort of a thing. So if believing that yes, my partner might be cheating on me, now that is something that is probably like unlikely. Okay, maybe he's very faithful or whatever. But at the same time, it having that delusion is still, possible. It could be right. But then non bizarre is like, thinking that you live in a basketball, that's like not possible, that sort of a thing. So that's the main difference between bizarre and non-bizarre. But both of them are coming under delusions only because you are believing in something that does not exist. Okay, could be likely but does not exist. In order to receive a diagnosis of delusional disorder, the individual must have been experiencing symptoms for 1 month or longer. So when we talk about schizophrenia, so they clearly mention that it should be around 6 months or longer. But when we talk about delusional disorders, this could be for 1 month or longer. The DSM-5 states the symptoms should be unrelated to physiological effects of substance use. Again, the same criteria when we were talking about schizophrenia, that it shouldn't be from any sort of substance, no drugs, no alcohol, nothing like that, and be unrelated to physiological, and are not better explained by another physiological or medical disorder. And delusions might be explained by other disorders, people like with amnesia also have some sort of delusions. It's like uh, rare, but they might, right? So it shouldn't be because of some other condition that you might have had. It should be like a solely thing that you're having, just that out of nowhere. So do you understand what's happening here with delusions?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have symptom assessment using virtual reality here. Only conflicting part of the whole chapter, most conflicting. Okay. This is why is it conflicting? Because all the other things are like causes treatments. You have to remember them. But over here, there's some sort of understanding required because it's something new. So we're just gonna first I'm gonna read the whole thing, then I'm gonna explain the whole thing. Then I've got around 3 questions for it. So we won't be attempting the question, we're just going to be looking at the marking scheme. So we know how it can be tested. Okay, it can come in short questions in your first part, in your section A. So that's the part we're going to be looking at. Okay, so that's the how we're going to be following this right now. So Freeman, he conducted this research because, okay, why just a background, the why they wanted to do this was because you can't always get all the data from schizophrenic patients, because A, they might lie about it, B, they might not even give you correct information, in the sense that they might not even be aware themselves. Okay, so they might, because they obviously their responses are always going to be exaggerated, they're having delusions and hallucinations, you can't expect the best of them, right? So that is why this whole procedure was invented using virtual reality, using like technology, in order to understand what what goes behind in the mind of a schizophrenic patient, in order to measure it, in order to measure how extreme it could be. So difficulties with diagnosing schizophrenia and related disorders can relate to interpretation of the individual's experiences in the social world. Social interaction may involve misinterpretation of other people's behavior and can lead to distrust, paranoia, and withdrawal. In one study, Freeman explores the potential for the use of virtual reality to eliminate such challenges when checking symptoms and developing treatment for schizophrenia. So it's not just checking symptoms, it's also for developing treatment. All of this, the whole procedure is required for these two things. The requirement of the procedure, these two things over here, just to check symptoms and develop treatments. Again, one thing that they're explaining, that yes, it is difficult to check how people may be interpreting certain situations, and that is why this whole method, this whole procedure is rather important. And that is why they wanted to see the effect of social interaction and how people perceive it. I'm not going to get into it, as I said, I'm going to explain the whole thing first, but this is just short explanations. Virtual reality (VR) involves using technology for presenting different social environments to the user, and has been applied successfully in the treatment and management of other disorders such as social phobias. Typically, symptom assessment has relied on an interviewer and patient sitting in a clinical room and discussing behavior over the previous week or month. One problem with this approach is that it relies on the individual answering truthfully. Also, discussing existing personal circumstances cannot rule out that beliefs or persecution are unfounded. Using VR, the assessment can be novel is new, okay, original, and standardized while assessing actual behavior. It can also ensure that paranoid thoughts and behavior are genuine, as the situation is totally artificial. The technique used for VR in Freeman's research involved a specifically designed library or underground train scene where the user takes walk or ride in the presence of other neutral avatars wearing VR headgear. This was trialed on a non-clinical population of around 200 students. Prior to the virtual reality test, a large number of validated measurement tools were uh, used to profile each individual's level of paranoid thinking, emotional distress, and other social and cognitive traits, such as the 16-item Green et al. Et al. Is basically other members like team paranoid thought scale. Part B, measures of persecutory thinking were also taken after being in the virtual environment, along with visual analog rating scales and an um, assessment of their degree of immersion in the virtual environment. The researcher found that those who scored highly on the questionnaire assessment of paranoia experienced high levels of persecutory ideation during the VR trial. This meant that they were more likely to pass comments such as the lady sitting next to me laughed at me when I walked past, rather than positive comments such as getting on with my own business. In related laboratory studies, Freeman reports that individuals who experience auditory hallucinations in the real world also experience them in the VR environment. Just the last definition, the process of forming an idea that one is being at risk of being ill-treated or harmed by others is persecutory ideation. This is the study. Now we're going to understand what it actually means. Okay, first paragraph is just telling us why they're doing this. Okay, this whole paragraph over here that I've highlighted, this is telling us first thing that you cannot know what a schizophrenic person is thinking because you do not know their perspective of the world. You do not know what's happening in their brain. So at the same time, you cannot never understand their social interaction. You can never understand if they are having a level of distrust, a level of paranoia, a level of withdrawal without being inside their heads. Okay, because that is something that they might not tell you themselves. So what he wanted to do, the goal of Freeman over here was that he wanted to use virtual reality, which is basically technology, to eliminate this effect of not knowing. And he wanted to make sure that we could not only understand the symptoms, but we could also develop a treatment for it. That was the main aim of the study. So generally, all of the behaviors are misinterpreted. That is how you formulate delusions and hallucinations. But how that does that happen? How does that misinterpretation take place in a social interaction? That is what he wanted to look at. And the last part over here is they're explaining to us that what virtual reality is. Okay, and how can you apply it to this specific thing, because virtual reality just takes you in different situations without being in those situations. So you can be in a train just by wearing that headgear. So we get those game controls. We have those games like PS4. Similarly, that I forgot what that thing is called, but we basically wear a headgear and you're inside the game playing the game, right? So that sort of a thing, you are in that virtual reality that you have created via technology. So it's like virtual means to do with technology, like online, right? And reality means another world, like another real world. So you are in that virtual reality, it's just online. Okay, but you are in a real place, in a real situation. Do we understand the first paragraph?
Yes.
Amazing. Looking at the second paragraph, which I have now highlighted, um, typically symptom assessment. So basically what they're telling us is that symptom assessment used to be more. Symptom assessment is what, just looking at what symptoms a schizophrenic patient might have. Okay, and how does he or she react to them, right? And how does it affect their behavior. That is your normal symptom assessment, checking out like checking the list of the symptoms that you might have had. Now that basically they're saying that that basically relied on a clinical interview, so more like a CBT sort of a thing. Okay, where you just discuss it, you have your therapist, you discuss it, you tell them. But then the two problems with that was that you cannot know if they are actually true. Okay, because the person might lie. And second thing, you don't know if those are perceived or did they actually happen. So let's say a schizophrenic patient is like, someone was trying to kill me on the bus yesterday. So how will I really know, okay, was that actually happening, or is it the brain? I can't always assume that they're thinking all of this, they're believing all of this, that they're being delusional. It can't always be like that. Some things might even be true, but how do I differentiate as a therapist, right? So that were the two problems, that you can't know if they're being honest. And the second one was you can't know what is actual and what is actually a false belief. So what they wanted to you how does virtual reality help here? Virtual reality basically provides you with original thought processes. Okay, it provides you with original behavior. So you are in that when you are in that environment, you have complete access, okay, to a schizophrenic, how a schizophrenic person would behave or be like. Okay, and that is why your results or your evaluation would be genuine. Whatever you find would be genuine because it is novel, it's original. It is not someone, not a schizophrenic patient telling you. It is artificial, of course, that has its own drawbacks, but it's actually happening rather than you listening to a schizophrenic patient. Second paragraph clear?
Yeah. I actually have a
Amazing.
question for evaluation, but I'll ask that later.
Okay, perfect. um we've got the third one over here. So over here what happened was that in this VR headgear, so VR, this virtual reality assessment, contained this headgear like we have in those game zones, okay? And that headgear basically took you into an artificial environment. So that was either that you were taking you taking a walk, or it was either that you are basically in a yeah, okay. So you were either in a specifically designed library or underground train scene. Okay. So you are either in a train scene or you're in a library, and you over there you are taking a walk, and there are also other people. Okay. That's the whole situation in that VR headgear, that virtual reality headgear, that when you wore it, you went into this artificial situation where it's either a library or a train, and you are basically walking amongst other neutral avatars. That's basically other neutral characters. Over here they've given us a picture, so these are the neutral characters, okay? um, that's the one thing. Before looking at the sample, the one thing we need to know is that, sorry, we know that there were 200 non-clinical population. Now non-clinical population is that the ones who are not going under some sort of a health related disorder, right? So it's not like a clinical population, it's a non-clinical population. So it is a term used in the study of health which refers to a group who are not specifically targeted, in contrast to a clinical population, which is a group of particular interest. So clinical population would be people, a group of people who have bipolar disorder. That's a clinical population. They are under the same um, same disorder. They're under the same symptoms, okay? But then when you're talking about non-clinical population, that's more of your normal population. There is no specific target for them over there. They're just general, holistic, random people, okay? So that's 200 of those. So before we actually this VR situation took place, where you wore the VR headgear and took this experience, what happened was they took a few validated measures. Okay, now why did they take this? They wanted to see to what extent is the person already paranoid. Okay, so what they would check is that if you are already paranoid in these measures, if you score highly, that means that you are already a little delusional, that you're already a little paranoid. And they wanted to see that after the VR, would the if your score over here is high, would after the VR, like after the virtual reality, would you be responding to responding to other neutral avatars as more, like as a more paranoid person, in the sense that would you be like that, that person was hating me or something like that, so if you have a higher score on these, that just shows how paranoid you are, okay, how delusional you are, okay? So these validated measures included, they would just wanted to create a profile for each individual, and that profile was mainly because they wanted to see how paranoid each individual was, how distressful their thinking was, okay? So each measurable tools were paranoid thinking, emotional distress, and other social and cognitive traits, such as the 16-item paranoid thought scale. This was one thing that was taking, and measure. Okay, so this over here, that's the thing that till part B, what they're explaining, till this full stop over here, they're explaining what was taken before. So they took validated measurement tools that were used to profile each individual's levels of paranoid thinking. They took levels of paranoid thinking, they took levels of emotional distress, another social and cognitive scale. And under these social and cognitive traits, there came this one scale that they've mentioned, which was called the 16-item green paranoid thought scale. So all of these measures were taken from the 200 people that were going into this assessment. Okay, they were asked to fill out these for these questionnaires, these surveys, these forms, and based on the answers for these, they were basically evaluated for how paranoid they were. Okay, and after the virtual, then after these measures were taken, you basically wore the virtual headgear, and then you went into that setting. And after you were done with that, once you were done with the VR part of it, what happened was that they took measures of persecutory thinking, along with visual analog rating scales, and an assessment of their degree of immersion in the virtual environment. So when you're looking at persecutory, sorry, okay, persecutory thinking. So how what was people's response towards me, in the sense that were they did they assume that people were trying to mistreat them or spy on them or harm them, so that was their that was what was measured in this persecutory treatment part, that they wanted to see if these people who wore the headgear, did they actually believe that people in the other, the other people were actually negative towards them, were trying to spy them, were trying to judge them or harm them. That was the one thing. Then it says they took visual analog rating scale. So when we talk about VASR, so visual analog rating scales, when you look at the most literal terminology for that is that, it's one of the pain rating scales. Okay, so what visual analog scale, basically you visually look at a certain scale, maybe like sad faces to smiley faces, that sort of a thing, and you rate the intensity to which you are feeling a certain thing. So over here they're going to be rating the intensity to which they were feeling paranoia, okay, to which they were feeling distress. So visual analog just means that it is visually present. So you don't have to read a question or anything like, oh sorry, you don't have to write a number or anything like that. It is you have to present based on like smiley faces or like stars are like visual analog scales that you have to, when they ask you rate it on a scale from 0 to 5, rate that. So those stars are like visual analogs. You're not you choosing a number, you're choosing a symbol. So that was a visual analog scale that was taken from them. And the assessment of the degree of immersion in the environment. So when you talk about degree of immersion in the environment, that, when the most literal meaning is basically, how engaged were they, okay, how present were they. So they wanted to see how, to what extent does virtual reality influence human senses. Okay, so the higher the degree of immersion, that means that the less a person notices that he is in a virtual reality. So to what extent do they believe that yes, we are in this situation. Okay, so if your degree of immersion is high, that means that you are not very, you do not, sort of forget the fact that you are in a virtual reality. So it's like with today's technology, you basically, it's like your sensory influence, like how influenced are you with your senses. So basically when you talk about schizophrenic patients, if you talk about their degree of immersion, if you talk about people with high paranoia scores, okay, if they would go in such an environment, they would be so worried about their environment would be distressing them so much that they would have a rather low degree of high degree of immersion. That just means that they would actually forget that this is a virtual environment, this is not a real environment. So do you understand what is happening here? This is a little complicated, that's why I'm asking right now.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Now we're just going to look at the results. Okay, so the last paragraph over here. So the researcher found that those who scored highly on the questionnaire assessment of paranoia experienced high levels of persecutory ideation. So if their paranoia scores were high, then their persecutory ideation was high. And persecutory ideation is basically the idea, the assumption that someone is going to harm me or ill treat me or just spy on me, just be a negative perception. So if you were scoring high on the paranoia scale before the virtual reality test, then yes, your persecutory ideation would be high during the virtual reality test as well. This meant that they were more likely to make comments such as lady sitting down next to me laughed at me when I walked past, rather than positive or neutral comments such as getting on with my own business. In related laboratory studies, Freeman reports that individuals who experience auditory hallucinations in the real world also experience them in the VR environment. So we understand the first part, and the second part is just that Freeman is just saying that when he also conducted a laboratory experiments based on this whole thing, only this whole procedure and aim only, and those actually helped him find out that if you are have VR was a good technology in the sense that whatever you are whatever's happening with you in the real world, that is likely to happen with you in the VR assessment as well, except that in the VR assessment it is being recorded. Okay, so if something is happening to you, like if you're having hallucinations in this world and you're having some sort of a belief, so that is happening to you in this world, and that same thing is going to be happening to you in a VR as well. You might be hallucinated over there as well. That's the general thing that we've got here. Do you want to ask the evaluation question now?
Yeah. So it was about mundane realism and ecological validity.
Yeah.
Because you said something about the degree of immersion. So that means they were kind of like higher the degree it was, so they were not really aware that they were in a VR. They were aware, but not to that extent.
Yeah.
So doesn't that make like a higher mundane realism? But at the same time, it's not like normal that you're always stuck to a VR set and go through a test. So that's what
Yes.
the conflict I'm conflicted about.
Okay, when you look at it from a methodological perspective, okay, when you look at it from a method that psychologists are using, so that way, then you can say that yes, ecological validity is less, okay, because from that perspective, it's just someone with technology and everything that is not normal to the real life, okay. But when you're talking about the patient who is going through that, you can still, when you talk about degree of immersion specifically, then you can definitely still say that yes, that there we can say that there's ecological validity, because the scenes that they have chosen, which is basically of a library and a train, that is still ecologically valid to the environment. So in that sense, again, it depends on what perspective you are looking at it from. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of method, then yes, then it's not ecologically valid. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of procedure, then yes, you can say it is still ecologically valid, because you chose a situation that is very applicable to real life. Similarly, when we talk about mundane realism, so that is basically how applicable your experiment is to a real life situation. So again, when you look at it from a methodological perspective, then no, VRs are not very applicable, because as you said, it's like a weird situation, nobody can always be in a headgear, okay. But when you look at it from a procedural point of view, when you look at it from what they're following and what they chose as the environment in that VR headgear, then you can say that yes, that is still, that applies to real life, that applies to a real life situation. Do you get it now?
Yeah, I get it.
Amazing. So that's one thing, that's the study for you, okay. That's your how to measure, okay, and how to measure the symptoms of VR, of schizophrenia through a VR set, okay. Before I move on, I'm just going to show you the questions that you can be tested on, because so that you have a nice understanding as to what can be asked of you. So over here, they've explained to us people with symptoms of schizophrenia are often diagnosed through an interview with their doctor. Freeman says that VR is useful useful for symptom assessment and the treatment of psychotic disorders. Freeman also says that this technology has many other applications. Okay, that is the description that they've given you in order to point you to a specific direction. Now they're asking you explain the symptoms of schizophrenia which are targeted by virtual reality. So again, what is targeted? First of all, the misinterpretation of other people's behavior. Now that's the key feature, which is now which is they are referring to as persecutory ideation. That is the one thing that they are targeting. Second thing that they also wanted to see, that if the occurrence of hallucinations happens in real life, would it happen in a virtual reality? So again, another thing, that because this is talking about symptoms of schizophrenia, you can use each symptom and relate it to virtual reality. Now you're using negative symptoms and you are relating it to virtual reality by saying reflect difficulties in social interactions. Withdrawal and avoidance of other people is frequent in schizophrenia. That's your symptom, and now you will basically relate it to virtual reality, leading to isolation and rumination. Okay. The last one, the use of virtual reality interactive immersive computer environments allows one of the key variables in understanding psychosis and social environments to be controlled. Why am I showing you this specific answer? Because this answer is not very clearly stated in the book. Okay, you are picking out a symptom and then you are relating it to virtual reality. So what I want you to do right now is, if you can snap this out, do that. Okay, so take a snapshot if you can, take a picture if you can, because this is information that you might need and it is not provided in the book. Okay, so that is why I want you to remember this likely answer that they've given us, these pointers, where where they're asking us that how will we understand the symptoms through VR. Whereas we understand what the symptoms are, we also understand what VR is, but we do not understand how we're basically connecting those two. So the first one is written in clear words, but then the second, third, fourth, that is something that they have provided in the marking scheme rather than in the book. Are we done with the snapshot?
Yeah, take it.
Do you understand what I just explained to you here?
Yeah.
Amazing. And now they've given us suggest two uses of, also this is because it's just two markers, so you can use any of this one point. So this, till here you'll get 1 mark, till persecutory ideation, then the occurrence and intensity of hallucinations and affective, that's your 2 marks. So 1 mark is for basic answer, which is basically identification, and 1 mark is for elaboration of that identification. So then they've given us suggest two uses of virtual reality and abnormal psychology other than the application of schizophrenia. Okay, now we understand what virtual reality is. What they are saying, we understand it on the basis of schizophrenia. They are saying how else can you implement them. Okay, so they've given us examples for that. Again, let the azan happen. I'll continue. Okay, yeah, that's done. So again, getting back to the question again, now this is something that is not given in the book. That's why I've chosen this, okay, out. So perhaps most striking application of VR to psychiatric problems has been the treatment of height phobia. For example, ML camp, 33 patients with acrophobia to 3 sessions of equally. So this they've given an example now. This is not a part of the book, okay, and this is our variant only now, but they have still given this. So at that point you could be really 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 clueless. So what they've given over here is they've given us an example of the study that ML camp conducted, where there were like 3 sessions in vivo or in a VR. Vivo is in reality or in a VR, where basically they were exposed to other patient, they wanted to see how triggered they people with height phobia might get if they were in the company of other people who were taller. Okay, that's the one example that they've given us. Researchers have also shown that virtual heights can be presented equally effectively with a head mounted display or a cave automatic virtual environment system in which images are projected into a room, and the user wears stereoscopic shutter glasses. Okay, a very complicated example. VR has also been applied to the treatment of other anxiety conditions such as post-traumatic disorder and flying phobia. So how PTSD, PTSD causes, you would you in a VR imagine the one thing that causes you post traumatic disorder? Like it's like you remember that situation again and again. That's what post traumatic disorder basically means, that you have a traumatic experience with something, and that you keep going back to that situation in your normal life. So would that happen in a VR too? Okay, now that is the sort of thing. Now when you are sitting in an exam, obviously, people can think of this, in the moment you can, but when that these are the sort of questions that complicated, it's just like you get scared. These are that sort of a question. But again, it is very much possible for you to create a situation in which VR would be used. You could also say that, because you have studied other chapters, so you could relate it to them. You could talk about anxiety disorders, you could talk about bipolar disorders, so you could say that, we can check that if people are still, bipolar in VR environments, like even if it's like a very fun, let's say the VR environment is like of a party. So would someone who is has depressive symptoms, would that person be depressive in a VR as well? That sort of a thing. That's something you can create for yourself. But over here, they've given us more constructed and legitimized answers. That's why I'm showing you this. So let's just take a snapshot of this as well if you've not already. I, do you understand all of this?
I do understand it, but the thing of this, the example over here, the ML cam, do I have
Yeah.
to learn it?
No, you don't. This is just me telling you that this is the sort of thing that might come. You look over here, the last thing, you will still get marks for this as well. Once you construct your point, you will get your 4 marks, because for two is your one is your basic answer, two is your elaboration, and one is like you, maybe if you add a conclusion over here. So so that is totally fine as long as you have a developed two pointers, okay? Because it says two uses, so once you have two developed pointers, so you don't need to remember this. This is something that they've just given from their perspective. You don't even need to remember the second one. So just whatever is easier for you to remember. This is just for me, just me explaining to you that this is the sort of thing that they might test over this. That's why it's a complicated topic, because they make it complicated. They just expect you to relate it to other things, not just schizophrenia. And that's why this topic specifically. So you don't need to remember this whole study of ML or whatever. You don't want to, that's totally fine. You just relate it based on your own understanding. So if you can use this one post-traumatic thing, you can use something related to bipolar, you can use something related to impulse control disorder. That is something that you can formulate on your own time. Or even if you don't want to formulate on your own time, Google it. Okay, easy.
Okay.
Perfect. I'm gonna wait, let me just stop the recording, and then we're gonna, because that's it for the class. But how do I even